What is a network? How do you know if you're a part of a good one? And while you might know a few things about the UIA, what other networks exist in this kind of broader ecosystem that we can be learning from? That's what today is about. So welcome. Thanks for hopping on. My name is Bridget Burns. I work with the University Innovation Alliance. And today I have a very, very special treat for you. Today we're going to be interviewing someone who is a legend in the network field, who I have learned a great deal from in the short amount of time that I've known her. And I definitely wanted to open up a conversation with you all so that you could benefit from her wisdom. So we're going to be interviewing Stacey Guney from Every Learner Everywhere. And so I'm going to be bringing her on. And Stacey, Dr. Stacey Guney, thank you so much for being here. First, welcome. Thank you so much for making the time. I'm so excited that we could finally do this.
Oh, I know. I'm really excited too. I love to talk about networks, especially since when I first took this job to be the kind of network. At the beginning, it was called a backbone, and I had to do a lot of reading and a lot of studying yours was one of the ones that I studied. So I still feel like there's a lot that we need to learn from each other about how to do this kind of work that we're trying to go for, in this concept of collective impact, social generative networks that a lot of folks can benefit from. But it's kind of different from the way business as usual typically is. So it's nice to talk about that.
So let's start at the beginning. And what is this job? So most of the folks here are not going to know who Every Learner Everywhere is. Mm-hmm. And how, if you could draw a connection between what you know the UIA to be and how they could understand that.
Well, I think anytime you have a problem that is talking about a system, something that is systemically a challenge, those kind of big, hairy, thorny problems that individually people have been trying to work on and maybe making some progress. But the idea, I think, between your work and ours is that getting more people together, that the sum is greater than the whole is greater than the sum of its parts, that there is then a kind of tipping point around knowledge and action and learning, really, because that's a big part of what I believe a network has, is this ability to gin up learning on a much greater scale and disseminate it faster, which makes it more effective at trying to stage the kind of work that I think we're all involved in higher education, which is understanding how we can we both have some involvement with the Gates Foundation and their work. The word they use is transformation. And but the idea for me that I kind of think is, how can we keep pace in terms of continuous improvement in higher ed to track with the needs of our changing demographics, our changing needs in society, and our changing workforce needs. And it's obvious that some of these institutions that are out there that have been around for a very long time doing good work, but haven't necessarily kept up with the pace of change that's necessary. So I would say the network approach is this idea that sometimes you have to get all of these amazing organizations and smart people together regularly to learn and grow from one another, because that is what is really going to help change at the system level some of these things that have been really kind of not moving as fast, especially in terms of results of serving students.
Okay, but when we're talking about who specifically,
who?
Every Learner Everywhere is working with what seat at a university and what collection of universities?
Right, so we are a conglomeration of 12 different partners that all have a different kind of focus in the world of what is called kind of the umbrella of digital learning. And we are very much concerned about how to ensure that students are successful, all students, especially with an equity focus, and how we can leverage technology to improve that. So we're working with both 2-year and 4-year institutions through a strategy that is going to extend through 2023, 2022, and hopefully touch nearly 500 different institutions as they work to implement digital learning. And our first focus is on how to really improve the success of those foundational courses in those first year. And in particular, we've seen some promising practices around the integration of adaptive learning. So courseware that helps to guide and taking people at all different levels. So it's not just this is the course that you take and that you follow the curriculum, but that the curriculum customizes to each individual student and their needs. So we hope that by starting there with those first gateway courses, that we can really improve first-year student success and retention. And by doing so, we're working with pretty much the academic affairs side of the house. A lot of times we go in and we try and align to what their overarching strategy is as an institution. So if an institution is in an area that has identified that they need more STEM graduates, then we would look back and say, okay, well, what are the gateway courses for STEM? And they're usually, if it's biology 101, it's anatomy and physiology, if it's in the health sciences, and really look at the track record of what the success rates are in terms of and how we can work with faculty and instructional designers and all of that to understand how we can we want to inculcate a practice of continuous learning around teaching excellence, and technology is just kind of a part of what everybody is expected to use in this day and age, but is still sort of having great examples of effective implementation are what we're really trying to model and push out more broadly.
Okay. And so we met through the Gates Scaling Partners.
Yes.
And that's like the Gates Foundation has identified a series of partners who they hope will become friends. And so they invite us to get to know each other and to potentially come up with shared problems, shared solutions, and figure out work together. And in that process, you started sharing information that you knew about networks that kind of blew my mind. You turned me on to a resource that I wasn't even aware of.
Are you holding the book? Good, because my copy I gave away.
Okay, so I don't have a copy in front of me, but could you talk a little bit about that book and just a little bit of your perspective on networks that you've gained from it that you didn't have before you read it?
There's some great resources out there that really describe how working as a network is very different in terms of ensuring that there is no real, there's an equal share of power and governance and idea generation. And that's what hopefully a network allows it to be really agile. So when I first started this role, even before I started this role, I had heard about the book Connecting to Change the World. One of the authors is Madeline Taylor. And we've worked with her and her organization Network Impact to really get an understanding of that process and really to just kind of understand our first steps. We ended up getting a kind of pre-baked network. Usually it's a bunch of folks. I think yours is probably much more representative of one that came together in a very organic way, which is wonderful. Ours was a little less organic and a little more engineered and hothoused, but nonetheless, we all came together. We were all in a similar space. And the network books and there's also another great resource around Collective Impact Forum, which has really explains kind of being a backbone and what that means and how you help guide the network by allowing the network to allow it to connect and then align and then produce, or kind of the three phases. And it was such an interesting, I'm sure you could share too, that bringing people together in the first instance to connect them, because even though you might know of organizations or other folks, it's different than really connecting, because that then means that one of the first things we had to do was go, okay, what is the problem that we're trying to solve? Are we really here looking at that and then prioritizing, because there's usually more than one, right? And understanding that, getting the shared understanding of what the issues are that we're trying to address. And then also understanding what the shared value proposition is by working together, right? And I would say I would applaud our network partners, because that takes a lot of intellectual humility to listen to other people about what they bring to the table that is different, and how you can start to create that synergy. And really, that has been a catalyst to learn a lot. And, the best part of that, then that's part of the align process. And then now that we have some work that's actually taking place, we're in that kind of produce stage where people are actually working together in ways to drive the field forward. So one of the first examples was APLU has had a grant that they've been working in adaptive in about 8 of their universities, some of which are in UIA as well.
The PLC.
Yes, exactly. Personalized Learning Consortium. And they've been out there about 2 years ahead of some of our folks. But we all came together at one point to say, hey, let's just get a first idea of what is a good handbook for how do you do effective implementation. And we produced that together in the fall. And we've already started to sprint off. Okay, now we're out here at some of these sites that we're working with, and there's a whole list of other assets that we see that are necessary in order to continue to guide the work forward. And to be honest with you, that is something that no one organization probably has the manpower or the resources to undertake on their own. So we coordinate it, but then it pushes back out to the rest of the network. So that's very different than, especially when you're grantors. I would say I used a very funny slide on our very first meeting together with these folks. And I said, each one of the partners in the room had formerly been grantees directly from the foundation. Mm-hmm. And when this network was set up and brought everybody together, then I said, it's as if we were an apartment building and the foundation, it was our landlord, right? But then the foundation sees the potential for these networks, as I think they've seen in others like them. And they said, okay, we want this to be field-led. We don't want it to be directed. It's not an operational foundation. I think you heard people saying that. So let's let the people out in the field who are the experts, we'll create an environment where they can lead this work, right? Mm-hmm. And so the second slide I put up there, I says, you've now been given the building. It's a co-op, right? And you're all owners of it. I'm just the management company as the backbone who's making sure that the windows are washed regularly and everybody is, that everybody has a home and that there's an appropriate governance and it facilitates that. But it's up to everybody to actually do the work. And that's a very different mindset, to be kind of working on your own, but working in the same sort of direction and then coming together. And part of what we've been doing every year is, and Network Impact and others have some very wonderful ways of tracking how many network connections there are between partners and individuals at those member institutions. And then also testing the strength of those relationships as well. And when you start to see how powerful the networks can come in just a short period of time, that's where you start to see really interesting things happen. So even work that's not being funded through this grant, people are coming together to work in other ways across other projects that are part of, so that's exactly what you're trying to do, right? You're trying to seed other things happening beyond what just the initial purpose of the work is.
Okay, so if you were stepping into, say the UIA or to say another network, if you were coming in from the outside and you're trying to get a sense of how real the network is, how serious, how is this just a thing where you're paid to hang out in a room together, or is this like a real work? What is the question you would ask of people there or of yourself? What is the thing you look for that you think is the most predictive that this is a real network?
I think it's all of a sudden when you're willing to put the needs of the network, where you see the benefit of the needs of the network being served even above the needs of your individual organization. That those, if you've understood the value proposition correctly, there will be times where somebody will say, I think it would be better if this happened. And then when you actually see that may have actually took even money out of their pocket and put it back into a collective pot, if you will, then you know that you've made it, right? And also, I would also say too, that making sure, I think any healthy network has discourse. And sometimes discourse leads to discord, but that's part of this kind of productive ability. If you get a bunch of people in the room and they were all agreeable for 2 days straight, you probably aren't going to end up getting much done. You may have had a really great time, but that's just, that means that I don't think, and I'm not talking about conflict. I think that conflict is difficult. The discord should be, is part of the intellectual process of moving forward and working through things, right? Mm-hmm. And so knowing that people are going to ask hard questions, knowing that they've created a safe place where people can ask tough questions, that sometimes doesn't exist at that beginning, at that connect stage, but when you're at a line, if you've built that trust and that transparency, as the backbone, we were always extremely transparent, particularly about things like the budget. Because people get very funny when you start talking about money, right? And so we have always been as clear as we can about the budget, about decision making, about all of those things. And so that when people had questions, that they felt comfortable enough. And also, not everybody is always going to at some point see that shared vision or comment, that value add that being a part of the network adds. Mm-hmm. And at that point, I think you have to be okay with people saying, I truly believe in what you're doing, but for this reason, I don't see myself moving forward, and be okay when people step to the side, and that doesn't mean that they're out maybe, but it does mean that, sometimes, that's the whole point of a network, right? Is that it doesn't, if one person or one organization should never be so important that a network can't continue to evolve around them. So I would say, is it one question? It would be, are people able to have those discussions and be open to that kind of change and it's not really churn, but there's movement. A network is kind of messy, and there has to be some level of comfort with that. With that kind of, it's not linear. Some people are very linear in their thought processes, or like an organizational structure. This is literally when you map it out like a big spider web, right? And so, if people are comfortable with that level of ambiguity, but usually they are, if you provide them with trust and transparency.
So I'm seeing more and more, one of the downsides of networks being successful is that people are treating networks as a means to an end in every kind of space. Like I'm seeing them prescribed as like the means to do X, the means to do Y. And then you see folks who networks are now just a way that they're going to do their work. It's not really a core part of their belief system about how the work should happen. And I'm trying to figure out how those of us who are on the other side of that fence, who kind of live, breathe networks and are, we've drank the Kool-Aid, how do we help them?
Yeah.
Because it's not about judgment. We need a lot of people doing this work. The siloed approach has not worked for most things. So we need, even if they do see it as a means to an end, how do we, what advice can we give them that will help people trying to run networks, make sure they're focusing on the right things? Like when you talked about Discord, that brought for me was, I like to stand in the back of the room and I like to see what people say after someone's given a presentation, because, if you position yourself as kind of just here to support them, you often get a little trash talk in the back where people are like, their data's not that good, or they only met X students, or, there's always like, well, let me tell you what's really going on there. And that's what I look for is it's important because those conversations are happening. So if they're not coming to me, then they're coming somewhere else. But B, how do we get campuses to share the trash talk in front of the room? And for me, in our network, whenever I see a hard thing brought up in front of everyone, I'm like, oh, this is real.
Yeah. There's something that's good.
These people actually trust each other enough to say something that's not just super polite. Because I've done so I've noticed this especially in other countries where I feel like people are politely failing their students. Everyone's so polite. No one says anything that's controversial, and they are totally wholesale failing their students. So it's going to take a little bit of that willingness to say some of the things that might seem impolite. And you don't have to do it in a way that's rude, but it's about the honesty of the network. Anyway,
that's I guess we could create a new concept called network integrity, which is, in order to maintain the integrity of the network, you do have to make sure no one in a network is going to 100% agree about everything that happens all the time. And the sooner you can get to that point of exactly what you just expressed, oh, good, now we know what it is. What is the issue that we can work towards fixing together? That's where those are growth points, right? Nobody has. There's no movement forward unless you hit that point of being uncomfortable, and that's when, in the last kind of year and a half since our network got started, I would say that those points have been when something really special has grown out of it, where we have, and we have really strived in all the decision making to always go for majority and on certain things, or super majority, but having known that still, again, I would say when people vote for the network, they know that they're voting by putting the network first. That's what I'm talking about. There's a certain amount of kind of organizational humility that also goes into the idea that we're trying to solve a problem together, and that systems very rarely change because of, we'd like to see that. Right now, the education system in higher ed has a lot of external pressures. I think anybody who's probably watching you right now can document them in terms of the financial pressures and the changing demographics in America. And strangely enough, those have been happening now for about a decade, right? And that's still not enough external pressure on the existing system to change at this pace that we need it to change for. Because every day there are students failing out of classes, and going further into debt because of that. So we have to start to bond together to get enough of this voice so that people who are out there doing this work can feel that they're a part of a movement and try and change it from within, because it's not going to change solely on its own from external pressures. That's the reality.
So what I notice is that I read magazines and I look at the public media and I look at what's going on nationally, and I see all of this skepticism about higher ed. And then I get on the campus and it's like, I don't see awareness or recognition that stuff is serious. Like, it doesn't seem like it's taken seriously. And it's partially, I think, because we can look to all the things that explain that that's not the case, or these people don't understand. But like, it just seems like we don't take any public skepticism very seriously when within higher ed.
There is external, I would agree with that. There is this external pessimism that is growing around the value of higher education. And yet internally, most institutions don't recognize that. I would say 10 years ago, right around the time of the recession, I thought, most people are going to recognize that these changes are already underway. But then when I was on campuses, I would say that most of us thought that there was a need for something to change, but maybe in 5 to 7 years, and that maybe they would retire before that happened. And here we are 10 years later, and I still get that feeling that people are like, well, we recognize that maybe we need to change. But again, I think it's that there's not this pace of, there's not this, this is why you need a network of people to come together to do a lot of case making around the fact that these are issues that need to be addressed. There is a sense of urgency around them that maybe probably doesn't exist if it's just one group inside of each organization on their own, and because that's hard to be that the lone voice in the wilderness of your institution saying, come on, let's move, come on, let's go. And there's only so much, I think, capacity for any one person or group of people, no matter how awesome they are, to lead that work for the long haul, right? So that's where I think organizations like yours, hopefully organizations like mine, are going to get this kind of community of practice across different institutions who can create that momentum and that sense of urgency that I mean, if it was going to have happened, it would have happened. And instead we keep getting more of a disconnect, right? So that does mean that there are people on the ground, but there's just not a critical mass of them at any one institution or any one group of institutions that is able to advocate in action some of the things we know need to happen. So
Right.
There's always power in numbers. So, that's what networks also bring.
Okay, so let's go to the rapid fire.
Okay.
2 questions, and you're just going to give me.
Okay, just so people know, she can give me a list ahead of time. I'm totally just doing it.
Facebook Live should be this way, by the way. I would never watch a Facebook Live that was like, here are your pre-planned, boring questions that you're going to get a weird speech that nobody wants to listen to.
Okay, rapid fire. Is that like 10? Is like a Twitter answer?
These are just things that are coming to me based on what you've talked about. So my first one is, what is a red flag for you when you look at a network on the outside? I know that you've seen a lot of networks and you've read about networks. Is there something that you see as a red flag?
Anything that's stagnant, anything that you can't point to anything new or fresh or growth or pivoting, because the whole point of a network is that it's supposed to be dynamic and it's supposed to be generative. So as soon as it starts to die, it would be difficult.
So I would add to that and say, I've noticed when people only do what they are paid to do, and when you're only doing what the funder or whoever organized you or whatever, like you're only doing that. So for me, one of the ways I know our network is alive is that I keep finding out about stuff that people are doing.
Exactly.
And I'm always like, oh, well, good to know. We should probably talk about that. We should probably elevate that. But it's confirmation for me that it's not just something where I'm like, sometimes I feel like that if there was a posture for networks, it's like the parents standing around outside in the corners and they're like shoving the kids together. Hey guys, to play together, be friends. And then just assuming that leads to friendship, which is, we as parents know that doesn't necessarily work that way.
That is an excellent. And now I'm thinking about all the times that you just set a little toddler down next to another toddler and they just sit there doing their own thing, and then great play date.
What is something that you wish you'd known before you started? Like if you could rewind time, go back to baby sweet Stacey, who did not know about her back in the day. What's a hard lesson or something that if you could reach back in time, you'd be like, oh, girl, I got you. You should know this one piece of information.
I have really, really tried to remain very true to the mission of being kind of a social generative network at heart. But there are times when, you still have grantors and you still have timelines and you still have deliverables. And I think that you can't put networks on timelines as well as it's not like no matter how good you are at project management, a network is not a project to be managed. So I think your time frames, your timelines, things changed, partners change into that agility sometimes is not at odds, but you have to be able to pivot in the other aspects of the work that you do. And I think that sometimes it's funny because you say, people are saying we want networks, we see the need of networks, but the people who fund us and sometimes the structures that we still work with are not yet designed to work with networks, you know what I mean? So you can have a network and can be doing great things, but sometimes there is a struggle back to, organizations and institutions and mindsets that still want it to be like a project that needs to be delivered. And so that has been a ongoing, interesting learning opportunity for us, because I think that there is a different way of just managing the work of and supporting the work of a network that's fundamentally different than the way that projects are done. That doesn't mean that projects cannot be successfully accomplished through a network, but it is just very different in the way that it plays out. And so timelines sometimes can be really fast, and other times you need some time, and doing things organically in the way that a network moves sometimes means that timelines are, at one point we were given an accelerated timeline, for example, and that I feel like we should have spent some more time in the connect and align stage, and that would have been helpful. But, sometimes you don't have time.
I get that, and that there have been plenty of times where a funder is interested in like giving you X money for doing Y, and like there is this imposter syndrome / trying to live up to expectations / whatever it is, where we have agreed to timelines where it's like, actually, I wish I could be like, hey girl, no, you can't. That's not in keeping your sanity, not in delivering on all these other things. So sometimes, that's one of the things that we, as we reflected back as a network, and one of the things we've learned is like that it always takes longer than you think. Because you're doing a networked approach, it is always slower no matter what. And for those of you watching, one example of a thing that people don't think about as funders when they're thinking, or if they're trying to form networks, is we still have these processes, but there's one person who receives a grant. There's one organization, there's one report. And do you know how complicated it is and how much actual extra work there is for one entity to receive funding and then give it to a bunch of others? It's actually like, the MOU process for us, our campuses, is like this whole behemoth that is just a super stressful exercise, and it has to be updated on a regular basis every time we get a new grant. And so that's another case where funders, they don't, how they operate is actually somewhat uncollaborative for funding collections.
Yeah, they're using a structure that predates kind of the network. So it's fundamentally. I think it's changing. I think that it feels as if I wouldn't say pushing back. I don't like that, but we're asking them to evolve a lot along with us, and that, again, is one of those points where it's just an opportunity. Like I say, it's an opportunity for growth. And you're right. Sometimes we've had to lean on partners in situations, and that's, that you have to balance the leaning in hard to get something done. Is that worth sometimes it is a good opportunity to build a relationship, but sometimes there's friction there, and so I always would say that that's fundamentally different, is that most people, when they're doing a project, will always put the project first. When we're working as a network, we always want to say what's in the best interest of the network as a whole. And, is this project going to serve that need? So I think that's fundamentally different, because most people, especially in the world of grants, are funding you to do some piece of work. And in an ideal world, we're looking for exactly that Venn diagram of getting this piece of work done and making a stronger, more robust, collaborative, generative network at the same time, right? And finding that sweet spot is a little bit dicey at times.
So I always feel like we're kind of in the middle, in that we are the best advocates for these institutions, and it's a privilege to tell their story, but we also need to raise money and be responsive to the funders who are trusting us. So you're in this very, the RFP process, they're searching for intermediaries, but I don't think people understand how much you are the intermediary. You are not running a network. You are not charging a network. Like, I have the privilege of getting to be around people who are engaging in network work, and I am somewhat playing like a facilitator on some of the funding, and I'm trying to like help them and identify problems I can solve for them. But like, people are like, oh, I think it's adorable when people say that either myself or my board, that we run the UIA. It's like, yeah, I get that sometimes too. Like, we heard that you're the whatever, and I'm like, no. That's where you have to. Would my life be easier if I could just be in charge? Probably, but that's not what it's about, right? So that would yeah. I mean, exactly. I am actually not that, and it's interesting, because I think it is a fundamentally different way to operate, to immediately think of everything before yourself. Especially for a lot of folks who come out of, if they have come out of academic affairs or something where there was very much a hierarchical relationship, and that's how they were operating. I was lucky that I was in higher ed, but I had some wonderful kind of really entrepreneurial experiences that I always advocated for, what in IT is like Scrum. So, that Scrums are not about that there's one person who's in charge. It goes out and finds teams that have the best, strengths to bring to solve a certain problem, and for me, this is like the next logical kind of
leveling up of that kind of Scrum approach, that if you feel comfortable in that kind of approach to problem solving, a network for me was like, now we have a network of people who can solve a variety of different problems, you know? And so that was kind of the next evolution, which was really interesting. But there are not a lot of people who have had that opportunity to work on the ground like that. So the natural default is to just automatically assume that you're the face of UIA. So Bridget, you must be the person in charge. And then you have to explain, actually, that's, you know, exactly. I'm not in charge of every learner everywhere. I don't even, if I had to go back in time in a spaceship, one of the things I would have advocated for was a different title other than director, because director makes it sound very much like an old school kind of, you know, I've informally started introducing myself in meetings as network Sherpa and foundation wrangler.
Yeah, chief cat herder. Yeah.
Yeah. So
it's a complicated thing, because it's like you know, I think a big part of my job is to advance the stories and the learning from this network. And people, you know, for a long time, they only wanted to hear from members of my board because they were presidents, and that's natural. That makes sense. But then when I would tee them up, they wouldn't talk about the network; they would talk about their university. And so it became very clear that like the role that I needed to play was telling the story of the network, and that was my sole responsibility, and to making sure that those stories were in the hands of the other people who could tell them. But it's almost like evangelist / coordinator / murder, you know, whatever. Well, this has been.
We'll tie it back to Game of Thrones, and this is not a spoiler alert. But did you watch it last night?
No, no.
Okay, this is not a spoiler, but at one point, the Red Queen is back, and she goes and she touches one of the swords, you know, of the army that's about to go out, and it lights up in fire, and then everybody else's lights up on fire, right? And at that moment, I'll just say that's like, if you're really truly the network are all the troops, right? You know, those are all the people on the ground, but somebody has to be the possessor of the person who lights a fire, right? You know, that is going to carry across and actually, you know, create that momentum. I think that's kind of what, you know, having that. But as you just described, at the same time as having that shared vision and that enthusiasm that I know anybody who's met you or, you know, understands that you live and breathe it, and it has to be like, you know, part of your life. But at the same time, as you just said, you have a lot of like back office kind of really bureaucratic things that you still have to be able to deal with. So from very in the weeds to very high up and, you know, cheerleader at the same time. That takes an interesting combination. That's what I love about it. I don't want to speak for you, but I think that's, the variety.
You have to be able to change altitude very quickly. And if you're someone who's, I find that people who are more entrepreneurial, you know, there's been a great deal of talk, depending on who you talk to, about their 5 human needs. And 2 of those are certainty and uncertainty. And you might be a certainty person, you might be an uncertainty person. Entrepreneurial people obviously like more uncertainty. People who work in bureaucracy and who like consistency and stability and planfulness is like their core desires in life. Those people, certainty is really, really important. For me, I'm a low certainty kind of person. I get pretty bored if things are super, super certain, if every day is the same. So the level of variety and that need to change altitudes all the time is what makes it super interesting. But, you know, I think that means that most of my team are much more high certainty people, and that's how it runs. Because if it was just someone who's okay with uncertainty up at the top, it would be a problem.
Yeah, that's right. We all, that was probably, especially in the early days of our network, we all had to get comfortable with a certain level of ambiguity. Yeah, and if people weren't comfortable with that level of ambiguity, they usually kind of just softly recuse themselves for a little while.
I think it creates a little bit of damage, because now I'm like, when people are super, super certain and clear and there's no ambiguity, I'm like, ooh, I don't know if I can work with this. It's too too rigid. So I'm so used to the flexibility. That's a problem. But well, anyway, this has been wonderful, and I'm so grateful you spent this time with us today. And we've learned a bit about Every Learner Everywhere. We've learned about networks. We've learned about the problems with networks, the best things about networks, what kinds of people should be doing network work, and exactly how funders could possibly be more helpful to cultivate and spread more networks. So I am here. This is my thank you to you for spending this time.
Thank you, Bridget. I really appreciate it. This is fun. We should get other people to, I don't know, do they make comments and such and everything? Other people who are part of other networks, I'd love to hear from them too, because I think that there's a lot to learn from one another.
I think it's the first conversation. I think we should have a follow-up conversation and let people know in advance so they can plan time for it. But I wanted to strike while the iron was hot and get you on here so that we could chat. I know that tomorrow I'm going to get a chance to talk with John from Educate Texas. So we're getting Scaling Partners Week. So I'm very excited about it. But yes, thank you so much. And for those of you who are watching, if you want to learn more about Every Learner Everywhere, Stacey, where can they go?
www.everylearnereverywhere.org.
That's very simple and easy of you.
We just got the domain. We're just, hopefully, I don't want to even say it, but we're trying to get a shorter version. It just wasn't available until literally today. So maybe we can shorten it.
Yeah, we're talking to a lady who has theuia.org instead of universityinnovationalliance.org, which we own as well. I just wanted Innovation Alliance or UIA.org. That was the one that would have been so easy, but nope. And you just got to get creative. Yeah, I understand that.
Exactly. So soon, coming soon, we might be able to shorten it, but not quite. Okay. So until then, the whole thing. All right. Thank you so much, Bridget. Thanks, everyone. Bye-bye.